Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your client's peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
Hello, and welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. I'm your guest host, California estate planning attorney, Matrona Jessica Ward. And today, my guest is attorney and elder law expert, Patrick Phancao of the Asset Protection Center in Costa Mesa, California. Patrick, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So, I'm going to start off our discussion with a question that helps people get to know you. What made you want to decide to go to law school?
Law school was, to be quite frank, kind of an afterthought. I had met a friend in college at UC Santa Barbara, and I was on my way to medical school, but it was kind of not miserable, but I just didn't feel it to be a calling. And it was, as we spoke about before recording, it was one of my first American friends when I came from Europe, and she had suggested, hey, why don't you just try law school? And I had no background, but it was just taking the LSAT, and I just gave it a shot, and I ended up doing okay. And that's kind of how I ended up in law school.
Wow.
It's really random.
And so what led you to the area of law that you currently practice as far as elder law and asset protection?
So that's actually a pretty long story, but I can just give you the background. It was back in 2000 or 2001. I was in-house counsel for a pharmaceutical company. And unbeknownst to me at the time, the founder was being detained for tax fraud evasion. And one day, after 3-4 months at the company, the CEO said, hey, do you want to meet the owner? I didn't quite understand. I was like, hey, I thought you were the owner. He said, no, it's actually being detained. It's a tax fraud case. The guy was a marketing genius. I ended up going there, just sharing patents and trademarks with him. And as you can imagine, he was a very sophisticated gentleman. At the time, it was bigger. I may be dating myself a bit, but it was bigger than Enron for the time for an individual. So the tax exposure was quite large. And I would spend hours on end with him, and just his marketing suggestions started helping the company generate quite a bit of revenue. So he really had a gift. And he took a liking to me, and he said, hey, you know what? I think you're trustworthy. I want you to partake in my white collar crime team. And at the time, I had just gone out of law school. I was like, I have never even filed my own tax returns. So how do you want me to help with that? Anyhow, he makes me partake in the trial. And the large law firm that was representing him at the time, senior counsel Jerry Pfeiffer, really kind, professional. And we needed to post bond in order for him to get out of jail and prepare for trial. They couldn't get a standby letter of credit because he was what's called a PIP, a politically exposed person. So no American banks would touch him. And then naively at the time, I was like, hey, I'm from Europe. I think I can help out. No European banks ever heard of you. So prior to YouTube and so forth. So the firm gives me the file and said, yeah, go ahead, just try to post bond. It was for $27 million, which was the largest bond at the time. Long story short, we're supposed to take 1 to 2 months. I took 7, but got it done. We successfully posted bond without exposing the $27 million amount, except for the Los Angeles Superior Court, but not to his other list of creditors, which I'll spare you for the time being. But that's kind of how I ended up doing that, got a little bit of notoriety. People from other states started calling me, telling me, hey, I heard you're the asset protection expert. I need another similar line of credit, so on and so forth. The gentleman was really grateful and said, hey, Thank you for doing this. Now you're going to start representing me individually. He was so large. He was the equivalent of a corporation, if you will. And he said, well, since you're starting out, I'll let you pick and choose which field of law you like to go into, because obviously I have a gamut of legal problems. I did my rounds, few depositions. I quickly realized litigation was not for me. And little by little, I started taking interest in just estate planning. I thought it was something positive. It was something that I could contribute and felt good about on a daily basis. And he ended up introducing me to his affluent clients, and I got exposed to tax planning and so forth. So that's kind of how I ended up in the arena.
Wow. And what does it mean to you when you're able to help someone, protect their assets and take care of them in a way that so many others couldn't do?
So what's incredible I find about estate planning is that it's kind of cliche, right? And people always say cliche are what it is because it stands the test of time, but it does feel good to have a positive impact, if not in society, but at least in your little community at large. So on a micro scale, helping the deceased, the surviving spouse, not incur any estate taxes, probate fees, so on and so forth. And you can see the impact that it has. That felt really good. And then on a more advanced level, if you will, being able to protect people from frivolous lawsuits, which is quite common, unfortunately. But that also felt really good. And it felt as a kind of an advanced type of planning, which I personally enjoy.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the most common tools that you use to achieve those results for clients?
For estate planning, the standard revocable living trust, if you will, we usually start with that. Very rare in California do I find that a standalone will is applicable, because if you own a home in California, that alone justifies a trust. Mm-hmm. The tools that I use for asset protection is quite broad. So considering neither of us want to be here till tomorrow, but some of those tools are irrevocable trust, domestic or offshore trust, if you will, Cook Islands, Cayman Islands, so on and so forth, and kind of more well-drafted LLCs in order for the client to be able to invest and live his life without the legal exposure, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And at what phase of life or at what phase of business might someone start needing your services?
So I'd say as a young family, young parents, usually they do need to start with a revocable living trust. And I always analogize the planning as a pyramid. And I say, listen, if you are just worried about probate, do a standard revocable living trust, you'll be fine. We'll revisit you every year, make sure that everything is on the up and up. When I'm dealing with business owners or people that are in high litigious fields, such as architecture or physicians, so I call that justified paranoia. Are you in an arena where you feel that a lawsuit is very likely? In that instance, I kind of look at their financial portfolio and I advise them whether domestic or offshore asset protection is viable for them.
Mm-hmm. And on the elder law side, how does that differ from the kind of estate planning that you would do for somebody else who's not in the advanced years yet?
So this is interesting because asset protection encompasses such a wide array of legal planning. So elder law, actually, I kind of ended up doing it because my father had gone through a medical episode and I was doing okay at the time, but the medical expenses practically brought me to my knees financially. And I thought to myself, geez, how do other people manage that if if they're not Medi-Cal eligible, if you will? So that's kind of how I got into it. So the first lesson for elder law, for me at least, is the simple education, as in, I'm not below poverty, so Medi-Cal is not applicable to me, and it's far from that. So I have to explain to them that, listen, you have primary residence, you want to make sure that it goes to your beneficiaries. You have some savings, maybe it's 120, 130,000, I forgot the exact dollar amount, but you have the community spouse resources allowance allowable. So I kind of teach them and create an instrument that enables them to keep their life savings, but in the event that they need a skilled nursing facility, that they could still qualify.
Mm-hmm. And tell me a bit about what you went through with your father's matter and how you're trying to help other people not have to go through that.
My father had a pretty unique heart condition, and he did not fall within the parameters of his insurance. So they said, listen, we're simply not going to cover it and so forth. And I was traveling quite a bit at the time. I practiced in Florida and New York as well. And it was just a lot to juggle. And I couldn't look at the paperwork in order to help him qualify for certain services. And because of that learning lesson, if you will, I said to myself, shoot, I'm an attorney. I'm tangentially related to this arena, and yet I'm just paying out of pocket and it's ruining me. And through that process, I kind of learned how to maneuver and understand the system and do it in a proper format to protect the financials. But unfortunately, I didn't do it for myself, but I got to do it for clients, if you will.
There you go. Now, speaking of clients, who is kind of your ideal client? Who are you looking to serve, and what can you do for them?
I like to represent young professionals because I kind of see myself in them, if you will. So young families to start off, and you can tell as they evolve in their professional career, such as I'm sure you will, as I have, you just try to get by initially, right? And then hopefully with time, you'll get a little bit of business success, you will grow, and then your initial concern is always, shoot, what happens to my kids if I'm not around, right? And then as you start to grow, a nest egg is, listen, I've been bothered by this vendor, this employees suing me for whatever reason. I want to make sure that if these frivolous claims come to fruition, I don't expose my life savings. So individuals of that nature that are kind of in the working world and then evolve professionally, I kind of enjoy the evolution process with them, if you will.
There you go. And then what are some of the common issues that you help those young professionals with as they're getting, more advanced in their career and with their families?
So at the fundamental level is simple incorporation. Shoot, hey, how do I get a company? Hey, I'm a physician. I was told that I need an LLC. No, not quite. You need a professional corporation. An LLC is not applicable for professionals. So just these little distinctions that mean nothing to them, as they shouldn't, because it's our duty. But I kind of help navigate them through the process of what vehicle best fits their professional needs.
That makes sense. How do you end up getting most of your clients? Where do they find you?
So initially, the typical mom and pop shop, me and my best friend, who was my business partner, we opened shop. It was pure word of mouth, just grinding all the time. Quite frankly, I grew not tired of it, but I just said to myself, I don't want to be doing this till I'm 60. I mean, what in the world? There has got to be a better way. So that's and then with the growth of the internet and so forth, marketing became easier. But one thing I wanted to impart with clients is before you hire anyone, or even us let us help you, educate you through the process of estate planning. Whatever is it that you may need. Is it a basic trust, Medi-Cal Planning? Are you worried about a lawsuit? Before you hire anyone, here is free informational book or consumer's guide is what I call them. And we provide them to them free of charge, and they can make their decisions. So that's how it ends up. And then since we've been around for a little while now, thankfully we'll have word of mouth. And so, yeah.
That makes sense. What are some common misconceptions that people have coming into their work with you that you have to set them straight on?
So mine is simple. Hey, asset protection, that sounds shady, man. Is that illegal and so forth? So that's a very common misconception. Or people that come to me that are high net worth and say, I understand you do tax planning at work. No, this isn't a movie. We do this everything above board. There's no funny games. So that's a common one, I would say. It's funny though, but it's a conversational piece, if you will.
Can you tell me any stories of a situation that was really messed up before they came to you?
There's quite a few actually. Yeah, I'll share a story and hopefully that'll give some background. I won't share any names, but a common scenario. So we represent a lot of corporations and usually their owners and so forth. So I had done a presentation for some three officers of the company that were going to come to quite a bit of money, right? So I do the presentation for whatever reason. One likes to go forward. The other two said, okay, we'll think about it, and they just never get around to it. We do the plan. A year goes by, everything is okay. They get sued. So jointly and several liability. Naturally, the party at fault, the partner at fault, was apologetic, but there's nothing he could do about it. He wasn't trying to pawn the responsibility onto them. But of course, the victim was saying, the purported victim was saying, I'm going to sue everybody. Litigation being what it is, they drag my client into it. Before litigation even began, I reached out to the counsel and I said, listen, you are dragging my client into it. Before we start, I'm not even going to wait for discovery. I'm going to show you the documents of his estate plan. And if you're knowledgeable in the arena, I'll invite you to see whether you think you have a chance of even collecting. But if you don't, then I'd appreciate if you didn't drag my client into this. It's an emotional ordeal, right? Litigation. And a week later, he amended his complaint and removed my client. So that was kind of a pretty good story.
Wow, that's a big success.
Yeah.
What would you say is your biggest challenge that you face in your work?
People understanding me, the accent. No, just kidding. What I provide is not a simple formula. So the learning curve is kind of the challenge, which is why I kind of came up with that consumer's guide, because my hope is that by the time they came in, they would have at least a little bit of an understanding. And I would always tell my clients, listen, you come to us and you don't like us for whatever reason, you have a working knowledge of what questions to ask for the next counsel. So at least walk away with that. So that was a pain point that lasted quite a while, but thankfully we kind of got over it. So
what's your favorite part about what you do? What lights you up the most?
Okay, again, not to sound cliche, yeah, but I really enjoy the clients I represent usually do their work for not their own benefit, because they're usually self-made individuals and it's the fruit of the labor that they want to pass on to the next generation. So I really enjoy the ease at which the administration or the passing on of the wealth, be it not just financial, but even the family values, to get passed on, the letters that they left within their estate plan for their children. Usually it feels good to see that result. I mean, it makes me want to achieve that for my future kids. So yeah. So,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's such a huge part of estate planning to see those results over time.
Right. I'm sure that drew you into that arena yourself, right?
That's true. That's true. Just to know that something that I did that fades into the background of memory will have a positive effect on someone 20 years from now. I love knowing that. And I'm sure it sounds like you do too.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. I'm not going to deny it. Because, law, as you're very well aware, a lot of people, rightfully so, associated with litigation, which initially when I began my career, I thought that's what I wanted to do. But having spent a few months, years, hours, whatever you want to call it, in the courtroom, I quickly realized this is no life. So not for me. Yeah.
It takes a certain kind of personality for sure.
Right?
What trends do you see coming in the future in our field, especially as far as with the estate exemption coming down?
Yeah.
What do you see happening for our clients in the future?
Yeah, I think there's a lot happening in the estate planning universe. Like you mentioned, the estate tax exemption sunsetting at the end of next year. There's a lot at play in November's election, I believe. So without getting political, I think we all have to prepare for that, because that can sway the planning that's available at our fingertips. So that's a big one. The economy, as you can imagine, despite what mainstream media is claiming, I sense people are struggling. Myself, I just see, just on a day-to-day basis, going to the grocery store, the cost of living has risen incredibly. So another thing that I see is the onslaught of lawsuits that are going to be coming around. So, and I see it in the type of clients that we are getting that are inquiring about that. So I think the estate planner, whether they want to or not, are going to have to get familiar with asset protection, because it's such a common scenario these days.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, those are just some of the things that I project.
So when someone listens to this and they say, oh my goodness, I've got to work with Patrick, where can they find you?
Well, you can call us. We're always available. 714-966-2646 when in Costa Mesa. Or you can just look us up at assetprotectioncenter.com. Simple enough. And the offer, as I mentioned, still stands. If they're not ready to hire anyone, they're not sure what they need, we provide an array of books and consumer's guide. And I try to take the legal jargon out and just explain it in simple terms for them to make a decision, whether on their own or they need counsel.
Perfect. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you to our listeners for listening. This has been the Legacy Leaders Podcast with your guest host, Matrona Jessica Ward. My guest today was Patrick Phancao. And for more information on Patrick and the work he does, you can visit his website at assetprotectioncenter.com. We'll also link it in the show notes for you. And Patrick, thank you again so much for joining me.
Thank you, Matrona. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.